It's always one of my favorite songs. I've always loved that. It just brings you into worship. Well, just lost my notes. It's going to be an early morning. Have you out in time for the early buffet. Why am I wearing a Patriot shirt? I mean, it's not unusual, I guess. I wear them most days of the week, especially during football season. But is there a message attached to it? That's what you're all wondering. Because normally I'm not a good dresser, but I don't wear T-shirts up here and stuff like that. Here's the story. Okay, I left my house when my car barely started. I think the battery's going. I hope that's all it is, a battery. You can't hear me? Okay. Fine. You heard that. I'll just, well, nice weather. So, can you hear me now? All right. So I left the house, and the car barely started. I knew the battery might be going, but I wasn't sure. And so I'm driving here. Then halfway here, the car starts bucking. I'm thinking, that's probably not the battery. The engine light's on. This light's on. The car's yelling at me. My daughter's looking at me like, "We're gonna die." And so I made it my first stop, which was very important. I got there. That was Starbucks. And then we went to Starbucks, didn't shut the car off, ready to shut it off. And then my wife calls me, "You left your shirt at home." So my shirt I normally was going to wear, so it's sitting at home hanging up. And not yet, we have a second car, but I have her keys as well. So I took both. So I took both sets of keys to both cars, and I left my shirt at home. And this was the only thing I had. I have one in my office. That's a Red Sox shirt. I didn't see it as being an upgrade, so I just kept this one on. That's why I'm preaching in a T-shirt today, which I don't really like to do. Matthew chapter 15. Okay. All right. This is going to be a little bit of a transition service for us. We've been working on the life of Christ through really all summer. It's good to have Rose back from the hospital. Bless you, honey. And we are going to. We talked about the teachings of Christ. A good part of the summer, we've been getting into some of the, I will call the acts of Jesus Christ, some of the things, the interventions that he did in people's lives. And next week, we're going to start looking at the parables of Christ. Not all of them. We'll pick and choose them, but we'll look at the parables of Christ and take a look at these things. I have thoroughly enjoyed, when you've been preaching for 35 years, it's not always, you have to really fight the temptation to go back to what you've known and you've studied for year after year after year. And this has been one of those series that has challenged me to look behind the curtain a little bit into the culture and the eyes of the Palestinians and the eyes of the different people that were looking at these scenes, and then to frame it for what it really means for us. We spoke a message a few weeks ago. We talked about how Jesus never separated the secular and the sacred. He saw them as one and the same. We see the secular and we see the sacred. I have a job. That's the secular. I go grocery shopping. That's the secular. Jesus never saw that. Everything he saw was sacred. And that one message, that was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, that really has changed how I'm looking at everything that Jesus is teaching here. Is really pretty amazing. So I start with this question. This is a great question that A.W. Tozier asked years ago in his book, Knowledge of the Holy. What is God like? What is God like? When I was a young kid, I grew up in a denomination in New England. I was not a Christian, but it was a Christian denomination, but they didn't really teach you how to have a relationship with God or anything like that. And that was a question I asked myself in my own little naive, young way. What's God like? And no one could really tell me, or no one that I remember anyway. And if no one really defines it, or I don't really search the scriptures and see what God is like, then I think God will think like me. And that's scary. That's the scary thing, because he'll judge the people I judge. He'll not like the people I don't like, and he'll like me a lot because I want survival. So the problem is people equate religion, sometimes denominationalism, Not that religion is bad and denominationalism is bad, but sometimes it's, especially in our Western culture, we have failed to bring ourselves to a full and correct image of God, of the God that we worship. We're often reduced, especially as we get older, to behavioral practice, missing the heart of the one we're trying to know or saying that we know. As stated in earlier messages, John 1, chapter 1, 1 through 18, John co-equates Jesus with the Father numerous times. He said this in John 14:6 and 14:7. I was just reading it this week in my own Bible reading. Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known the Father. From now on, you do know him because you've seen me. In other words, you want to know what God is like? Just look at Jesus. He was God in flesh. That's why this series, I think, was important. We could see Jesus Christ, when we look at the life of Christ, what he taught, how he dealt with people, the things that were his values, we can say, that's what God is like. So let's look at this. We want to look at the story of two ladies. I unfortunately am going to go through this relatively quickly because there's more material here than I could probably get through. They are not famous at all. I mean, we've been reading about them as we read our Bibles throughout the years. One of them is, I would say, infamous, and one of them was insignificant. And they found themselves in their lives both brought to the feet of Jesus Christ for different reasons altogether. They needed God to intervene. They needed an advocate desperately. They desperately needed an advocate. They desperately needed somebody on their side. They desperately needed somebody who understood and looked behind the veil. And thank God they ended up at the feet of Jesus Christ. Matthew, they both start with M, chapter 15. And Jesus went away and withdrew to a district of Tyre and Sidon, their Gentile areas. And behold, a Canaanite woman from the region came out, and that'd be a Syrophoenician woman in some translations, that came out and crying is, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, send her away, for she is crying out after us. And he answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered, is it not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs? It's pretty harsh. She said, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Then Jesus answered her and says, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. So we have this needy and broken woman at the feet of Jesus. Two immediate barriers there. She was a woman. That was the first thing. Jewish men did not talk to Jewish women in public places, especially Syrophoenician women, Canaanite women, or the Samaritan woman at the well. And here's Jesus. Jesus' men did not have to acknowledge an unknown woman. And it's really funny how Christianity is seen as repressive to women, but in the day, Christianity gave women value, gave them dignity, gave them humanity, elevated them in the sight of culture throughout the New Testament. And Jesus would seem as ignoring her, not even acknowledging her, would be sort of normal to her and the disciples. So we had this interaction he directed at two targets. He directed us at the lady, and he directed us at the disciples, because both had something to learn here about who God really was. The Gentile woman acknowledges that Jesus is indeed Lord and Jewish Messiah. she acknowledges it. Funny how the religious leaders didn't know it, but this Gentile woman could see divinity in Jesus. And Jesus did not go easy on her at all. He ignored her. And when he did this, the disciples thought, well, this is what Jesus wants to do in this case. So they tried, send her away, send her away. Or, we don't care about your Gentile daughter. We don't care about your problem. It's not our problem. You're not one of us. You're not a Jew. You're a Syrophoenician. You're a Canaanite woman. He insulted her nationality. He put himself above her. He equated her to a dog. And again, not culturally abnormal at that time, but still degrading. Dogs were rarely pets back then. They were seen as scavengers. Now we have pets. I have a little white dog. Couldn't scavenge anything. It doesn't have enough teeth left to do it. So I'm not sure it's a dog. But anyway. But here's, I think, the biggest message is the disciples. You don't know God's heart. He's going to show them. God cares for this lady. This lady, as insignificant as she is, nobody in the Canaanite world, nobody in her own culture has come to seek this Jewish guy who she sees as being the Messiah. God, this woman matters to God. That's really cool. Because everyone in this room really matters to God. And everyone outside of this room and across the street in the highways and byways really matters to God. And Dr. Lewis is in Cambodia now teaching because the people in Cambodia really matter to God. And we have people in Mexico ministering in Mexico because people matter to God. We started a foster care children's home because people matter to God. Not just a select few. God does not take human neediness and brokenness with an unmoved or calloused heart. He really cares. He obliterated, I love this, racism. There is no racism anymore. I mean, racism and Christianity are oil and water. They don't believe together. For God so loved the world, that's every race, every creed, every color, every size, that he gave his only begotten Son. So he's like saying to the disciples, he's saying, look at, guys, it's not business as usual. It's not the Jews rule and the Gentiles to rule. it's not that. This isn't business as usual. I'm rewriting the rules. I'm rewriting culture. I'm rewriting the norm. You want to know what God's like? This is what God's like. He cares about this woman, Jewish or not. He cares deeply about her. To the lady, your daughter is healed and your daughter is delivered. Your faith in my nature and my power, Jesus speaking, cut through all the negative and caustic way I was treating and speaking to you. I couldn't insult your faith away. You emptied yourself of pride and you emptied yourself of dignity and laid yourself at my feet because you knew I could meet your need. See, he was rewriting the whole culture of the day, and the disciples were seeing it, and this lady who had no relationship, I guarantee you, with the Jewish man saw it. She says, I don't take your pain for granted. I love that sentence. Jesus, I don't take your pain for granted. I hear your prayers. I see your heart. Thank you for believing in my goodness when you have seeming evidence to the contrary. So here's this woman. She hears about Jesus. She goes, I don't know if this guy will help me, but I think he can help me because he's doing some stuff I've never seen before. I'm going to seek him out. I'm going to humble myself at his feet. I'm going to beg. He can't insult me away. They're going to have to drag me out of here. Of course, none of that needed to happen. And the disciples are like, he did it again. John chapter 4, the woman, the Syrophoenician woman, that's another. We won't get into that story, but that's the same amazing stuff in that, where Jesus talked to this woman by himself at the well as the Samaritan woman, sort of blew the disciples' minds. Then the second story we have, it's a guilty woman meets God. The first was a needy woman. Now you have a guilty woman. This account starts in John chapter 8. But it really starts a little bit before that in chapter 7 when Jesus confronted the disciples, but the Pharisees, and he got a little bit of a debate with them. You can read it through. And back in John chapter 7, Jesus clearly claims his deity and his divinehood, and they get really mad. The soldiers were sent to arrest him, but the soldiers came to arrest Jesus, and they were so amazed by what he said and what he was doing, they couldn't. They went back and told the Pharisees, I've never seen anyone do this stuff like this before. I couldn't arrest that guy. So the Pharisees were a little bit upset over that because they wanted Jesus out of the question. This guy was beginning to bug them. Nicodemus tried to talk sense to them, but no avail. They missed getting Jesus in chapter 7, so they sort of geared up for another round. The Pharisees had to do something to take Jesus out. They had to come up with a knockout punch. They needed to find something they could point at and say, aha, we got him, so they could arrest him. And it didn't take long. Jesus in chapter 7 withdraws because they were all upset. But he comes right back the next day in the morning, and he comes in John 8:1. But Jesus came back to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. That's the next day after they just tried to arrest him. And all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, placing her in the midst, right in the middle. And they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. So now they're being sort of nice to Jesus. Teacher. This is a chest move by the Pharisees. This woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. So what do you say? And they said this to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. And Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. Just started scribbling on the ground. We don't know what he scribbled, but I think I know, and I'll tell you later. I think I figured it out. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin amongst you be the first to throw a stone at her. Checkmate. They just get outmaneuvered big time. And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. And when he heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older stones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. And Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. But let's not wipe out this last phrase. And from now on, go and sin no more. So apparently, if I understand this right, the Pharisees just went out in the morning and said, let's go find somebody committing adultery. You wouldn't think it'd be that easy. You know, there's Adultery Avenue. We just go down there and find someone committing adultery. No, they went out and tried to find how convenient. Now, I'm adding a little bit to this because we don't know, but actually some of the research I've done on it and looking at somebody who knows this culture, lived 60 years in this culture, they don't put this beyond a rational argument. Let me put it that way. Because taking the entire body, where was the guy? I mean, adultery means there's two people involved. Where was the guy? In Leviticus 20:20, the guy was supposed to be stoned as well as the woman was supposed to be stoned. Now, let me just say a little bit about this sexual sin, because this is something we don't get to very much, and I want to be true to the scriptures. In the whole body of scriptures, as you look at from the beginning to the end, sexual sin has a connotation to it that goes beyond. And I can't know if I can totally explain it. I'm just taking scriptures at face value. Where it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, when you sin, you latch yourself onto a prostitute, you sin against your own body. When he looked at it in Ephesians church, let not fornication, that's all sexual sin, be named once amongst you. When he judged ancient cities because of sensual sin, there was a price to pay for these things, and that's why they had it in the law. People who committed sexual sins, they were guilty under the law of death. And it's funny because the Pharisees mocked the people in chapter 7 for not knowing the law, yet they had a major violation of the law right in front of them. Where was the guy? Could it be assumed? And this is a question mark. I wouldn't bet my last dollar on it, but if you want to put up some money, I'll bet your money on it. I would assume, could we assume that this guy was used by the Pharisees to set this woman up? He was a pawn. If that's the case, this is more vile than we even thought it was. They were not interested in justice. They wanted Jesus. If you look at the setup of where this most likely took place in Jerusalem at that day, it's very likely the Roman soldiers were watching this from afar or up high. There was best we can tell, there was a wall that the Roman soldiers they watched everything. They patrolled the whole city. And one of the things that Rome did is they put up with the Jewish religion, but they wouldn't let the Jews execute people by themselves. They needed Roman permission to execute people. That's what happened with Jesus. So they had to take him to Pontius Pilate and things like that. So Jesus all of a sudden said, yeah, stone her. Well, maybe the Romans take Jesus out. So they thought they had a pretty good move there. So the hostility shifted all of a sudden from the women to Jesus. If Jesus stoned her, he would have lost the heart of the people, probably been arrested, because, again, only the Romans were allowed to do capital punishment. If he excused the sin, he would have been seen as not knowing the law and being lenient towards holiness and lenient towards sin. So Jesus takes on this aggressive Pharisee challenge and turns the attention right back on him. He puts him on the defensive with his own checkmate move. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up saying, let him who is without sin among you cast the first stone. I wish we had a fly on a wall or somebody when he said that. All of a sudden you hear all these rocks clunking on the ground as people are dropping them. There was in that culture back then, a shame-pride culture back then. They used shame a lot. They used pride a lot. All knew in the Jewish religion that there was only one sinless, and that was Yahweh. And Jesus, according to them, certainly wasn't Yahweh. And to state otherwise would bring shame on your family. So the crowd would turn to the elders in the mob, and who would carry the most respect. And that's why the elders dropped the stones one by one by one. And Jesus just writes something in the ground. Here it is. It's Greek. Na na na, abu boo. I won this round. She goes free, and you guys are ashamed. That's what I would do. Jesus probably didn't do that, but he wouldn't trash talk, but I would. So I'm not Jesus. So what do we pull out of this story? We won't keep you much longer here. The religious didn't seek to restore this woman. Jesus had her protection and restoration as his goal. He never excused her behavior, but his goal for this woman was restoration. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't shame. It wasn't rebuke. It was restoration. What can I do to restore this woman? And that's how he did it. Neither do I condemn you. Who said that to her? God. Think of that. God said that to her. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. The creator of the universe looked at this woman who was caught in a filthy act. Go and sin no more. Neither do I condemn you. I don't know what you have to be forgiven of. I know what I've had to be forgiven of in the past, and I don't even want to think about the future. But to think that God, because of Jesus Christ, can say, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. As I get older, I'm 61. I feel weaker now than I did 35 years ago. I don't get tempted the same way. I'm too old to. But my mind and my motives and the inner part of my life, I'm saying, God, I'm a mess. I remember crawling out of listening to messages that I try to listen to preaching myself, thinking, God, there's no hope for me. I've shared the story so many times. When I was a young Christian, I was pretty close to being perfect. I was. I mean, I became a Christian. I just had about 4 or 5 sins to get rid of, and I was good after that. I was good. I could go right from okay, I had to quit this, I had to quit that, I had to stop that, I had to stop that. Then I can start judging people. So I was good at it. And so I would get my Bible college buddies, and I'd judge them, and I'd judge this person, I'd judge that person, because I didn't have these particular things I struggled with anymore. I got victory over those things relatively quickly in my life. I didn't have any of those strongholds some other folks maybe have to face and things. But then I started studying the Bible and hearing the Word of God preached and reading books, and then it began showing me things about myself. And it hasn't stopped. I've asked God that it would stop, but it hasn't stopped. He's still showing me things about myself all the time, teaching me about myself all the time, showing me things where my motives are skewed and my goals are skewed and my heart has got hardened. He's always peeling back this banana peel in my life. He's relentless in transforming me into his image. How many times I've heard, neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more. Now it's like, God, thank you. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for standing by me. Thank you for using me when I don't deserve to be used. And let me say this. I was thinking about this morning too. This is off script here. But I was just thinking, God uses everybody. And in whatever state that we're in, you think of that. He doesn't just use the strong. He uses the desperately weak. The thing is we dictate to God what being used is. It could be a word in season. It could be encouragement. That you just say something to somebody, and that's God speaking through you to them. And it may be a 5-second thing. In your weakest state, you could say it. And be absolutely used by God for a divine moment in somebody's life. God uses me? Yeah, he uses you. Just shut up and be available. Suba, shut up and be available. You've heard me talk about that before. And that's the beauty of grace. And that's the beauty of mercy. He takes these messes. There's a lot of people in here caught in the act of adultery. I'm not talking about adultery. I'm talking about whatever the stuff is in our life. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's insecurity. Maybe it's doubt. Maybe it's discouragement. Maybe it's judgmentalism. Maybe it's unforgiveness. Whatever it is, we can come to God in whatever state that we're in and just be real with him. You don't have to be real here. You're able to. You're welcome to. Heck, the pastor wears T-shirts. By mistake, but it's still a T-shirt. And but because sometimes you can't be real around people because people won't understand your realness, but you can be real with God. And he never shuts you off. He hears you every time. God, I know I'm a mess. You know I'm a mess. Better than me. And thy will be done. Whatever it is, God, you want to do. I remember sharing just my personal story. I've shared this before, but this was a pivotal moment in my life. when we had lost our Hannah Grace. It was a few months later, about a month and a half later, and I was by her graveside, and I was having an absolute meltdown, and I was sobbing uncontrollably. I was crying. I was so mad at God. I was so mad. I shook my fist. I was cursing him. I was just so mad. And I remembered, and I don't know how long I was there, an hour or maybe, whatever it was. I couldn't even control myself. And I looked down and I read those beautiful verses, became my life verses, that were Hannah's verses that her mom, my wife, gave her. And on Hebrews 10:35 and 36. Do not cast away this confident trust in me. This is what I was saying to God. I said, God, I've been pastoring at that point now for 27 years, 28 years at that point. God, what do I do? I can't go back. I have no strength. I have no power. I'm a dead man walking. God, I'm a piece of toast on the inside. And I'm thinking, what do I do with the rest of my life? Because I can't go back to doing this. I was way too weak. I was way too fragile for that. And I knew it. I wasn't deceiving myself. I knew it. And I read those verses, and it was like God just spoke to me on a personal level. I've shared this before in small circles, but it still didn't fit this morning, so I'll share it again. Do not cast away, Hebrews 10:35 and 36, New Living Translation. Do not cast away this confident trust that you have in me, knowing the great reward that it'll bring you someday. Patience, endurance is what you need now. So you continue to do my will, then you'll receive all that I promise. So I was thinking, okay, God, patience, endurance, hupomone, Greek word, I know that. The Greek word means patience under trials and afflictions and pressure. I know all that. Okay, what does that mean? You don't want me to quit? I mean, I can go through the motions. I know how to communicate. I know how to study. I know how to rightly divide the scriptures. I know I've been trained in all that. I've been doing it a long, long time. I can show up on Sunday mornings and do the best I can, God. But, I have these people that love me, and I have these people that you call your own, that sheep. They deserve better than a shell. And he said, first of all, Tim, they're my sheep, not yours. And I don't need anything from you but to be available and to show up. And I can take it from there. And all right, I was still mad. and so then I'm thinking, but I have no strength. I'm still arguing with God, and I knew I was in this conversation with the Lord. And I'm no good. I'm not the same person. I'm a shell of who I was. I don't see me ever getting over this, ever coming back from this. At least, how do I know? It's just the journey was just beginning. And then God just gave me everything he said to me was through the scriptures. 2 Corinthians 12:9 and 10. My grace will be sufficient for you. My strength will be made perfect in your weakness. And I can take care of my people even though you're weak. See, that's how God deals with people. We just come to him. We have a woman at the feet of Jesus begging for her daughter to be healed. We have a woman at the feet of Jesus needing to be forgiven. And God just sees them both the same. He goes, go and sin no more. The adultery thing, ma'am, that's not good. There's a better way than that. I'll help you not do that. But I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. I don't condone it, but I'm certainly not going to condemn you either. See, everyone here is wrong. The lady was wrong for what she did, set up by the Pharisees or not. It was wrong, and she probably has a broken relationship that needs to be mended now, that needs to be repaired, but she stood right with God. And the rest of you, he's saying to the crowd, we're ready to kill this lady when you yourselves are guilty of so much. What makes her sin worse than yours? I do not and will not condemn her for her weakness, because in a short period of time, I'm going to die on a cross. And when I die on that cross, I'm going to pay for her sins. I'm going to pay for the patriarchs of old sins, David's sins and Moses' sins, all their sins. I'm going to die for the sins of the future. Every sin that's ever going to be committed, my sacrifice on the cross is going to pay for them all. So I can look at the whole human race and say, neither do I condemn thee. Isaiah 42 verse 3, I love this. This is looking forward to this time. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He will bring forth justice. So if you're guilty, how do you think God thinks about you? Do you think his thoughts towards you are those of an angry person? I get pretty frustrated with myself sometimes, so I think God gets pretty frustrated with me. Because I'm doing things I don't want to do, or I'm thinking things I don't want to think. I'm untying my shoe when I don't want to tie my shoe, or something like that, and stuff. And so I think God must be thinking about me like I'm thinking about me, and thank God he isn't. Because he sees me at the feet of his feet too. The God of heaven wants us to know that how Jesus dealt with this lady, indeed, Jesus dealt with the lady before this, is how he'll deal with us. He is a God of building, restoring, transforming, never condemning, and never judging, no matter what state you're in. Whether you're up here preaching the gospel, whether you're evangelizing in a foreign land, if you're a housewife just buried and raising kids and going to soccer practices and chasing diaper control or whatever it is, every life is different. It's all sacred. It's all absolutely beautiful before God. And he will use you in that state for that time throughout the rest of your life. Jesus, thank you for these words, and thank you for the precious people here. And thank you for the kindness that you show for us. Thank you for your forbearance that stops judgment from coming upon the human race until you could judge the human race once and for all through your cross. Father, thank you that you look beyond race, prejudice. Thank you that we can come to you with our most desperate things and lay them at your feet and know that you've heard us. Not always knowing what you're going to do and how you'll answer, but knowing that you've heard us. And then when we hurt, you hurt. When we're destitute, you understand. You understand how frail we are. Father, maybe we're that woman caught in adultery. Maybe not the sin of adultery, but we're caught in whatever that sin may be over and over again. And all we hear from you is we may condemn ourselves, and people in our life circle may condemn us. But you never do. You restore us, you dust us off, and we go on with you and walk. Thank you for loving us like this. If you're here today and on the webcast maybe, or you're watching this on YouTube 3 years from now, if you have never asked Jesus Christ to be your Savior, I'd like to give you that opportunity right now in a quiet place of your heart. Say, dear Jesus, thank you for dying on the cross for me. Thank you for shedding your blood for me. Come into my life and save me. Every head bowed and every eye closed. If in your own heart of hearts, your own way, your own voice before God, you ask Jesus Christ to be your Savior today. Salvation is an event. It's not a process. We're transformed into his image through a process, but the day we're sealed with his Holy Spirit happens at a point in time in everyone's life when we invite Jesus Christ in. If in your own way you did that today, let the person who brought you here know, or let me know, or one of the pastors, send us a note. We'd love to hear from you. Father, bless the offering we're about to share. We give it to you because of your mercy, because of your grace, because we believe that your kingdom needs to go forth. And you use your church, your people, to reach the world. Bless now.